I'm John Kernicki. I run the energy businesses for General Electric. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in today's Energy Summit and would like to commend you and Senator Domenici for your leadership in attempting to forge a bipartisan response to our current energy challenges. GE's energy businesses offer a diverse portfolio of products and services in the area of fossil power generation, gasification, nuclear, oil and gas, water, transmission, distribution, smart metering, and renewable energy technologies such as wind, solar, and biomass. I know policies for all of these technologies are of interest to you and your committee, but today I would like to focus on just one in my opening comments, the production tax credit for renewable energy. By the time the gavel falls on the 110th Congress, the world will know the answer to a very important question. Will Congress and the U.S. government be a reliable partner in the quest for a cleaner and more secure energy future or not? Since entering the wind industry in 2002, GE has invested over $700 million in technology, increased wind turbine production sixfold, and tripled our U.S. wind turbine assembly sites. We've expanded capacity from 10 wind turbines per week to over 13 per day, and we have grown renewable energy jobs at GE to more than 2,500. GE has also tripled the number of its suppliers in the wind industry, who now cover 15 states and account for an additional 2,500 jobs. Last year, we announced that 2 blade manufacturing companies will build brand new facilities in Aberdeen, South Dakota and Newton, Iowa to supply GE wind turbines, adding an additional 1,250 jobs. The renewable energy tax credit is the foundation of this growth. In 2002, when we entered the U.S. market, wind energy added only about 1% of the new electrical generating capacity installed that year. Last year, 34% of the new electrical generating capacity was wind. We're proud to have played an important role in one of the world's most successful renewable energy policies, Mr. Chairman. You and your colleagues should be very proud of that success. However, complacency and inaction bear consequences. According to a study last year, Navigant Consulting concluded that PTC expiration would place 76,000 jobs and more than $11 billion in clean energy investment at risk. And there is a global dimension as well. The connection between a stable domestic policy and a vibrant export sector for renewables is exemplified by Germany, whose incentive system has earned it a reputation as the world's leading green power country. Wind power technology is the country's second leading export for Germany after automobiles. Yet this year, the United States, thanks to the PTC, will surpass Germany in electricity generated from wind energy. How does the United States win by stumbling into an outcome that disrupts this efficient deployment of clean energy? By extending the PTC, you will reaffirm the United States' global leadership in the deployment of clean, carbon-free, renewable energy and send a signal that Congress stands ready to join others in addressing the more complicated problem of climate change. We are ready to help. Thank you again for the opportunity to participate in today's summit. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rowe, please go right ahead. Thank you for being here.
I am the chairman of Exelon in Chicago. Through our retail utilities, ComEd and PECO, we serve over 12 million people, which is the largest number of any electric company in the nation. Our generation company has fossil, hydro, nuclear, and renewable generation facilities. Indeed, our nuclear fleet is the largest in the nation and the third in the world. I have had the privilege of chairing in the past the Nuclear Energy Institute, Edison Electric Institute, and the Bipartisan National Commission on Energy Policy. I commend to the members of this committee NCEP's reports on climate change and increasing our energy security. Our 3 priorities at Exelon are quite simple. First, we believe Congress must pass legislation that limits greenhouse gas emissions. We know that is what brings you all here. Second, and I apologize for a somewhat hackneyed phrase, we believe we need something akin to a Marshall Plan to jumpstart the whole array of low-carbon energy resources. And third, we believe we need continued support of wholesale competitive markets. I want to applaud you, Chairman Bingaman, for your early leadership on carbon cap and trade systems, and also for including cost containment provisions. I believe these components are necessary as Congress seeks to pass a bill that slows, stops, and reduces greenhouse gas emissions while protecting the American economy. We need an economy-wide bill with realistic targets and timetables, an effective cost containment mechanism, and rate protection for our customers by allocating allowances to regulated electricity delivery companies. Our industry needs prompt action, or it will be hamstrung in making the right investments. The reason I made the metaphor to the Marshall Plan is that nothing else will suffice. Changing from a carbon-based economy to a low-carbon economy is a very, very big deal. We obviously need every form of national commitment to energy efficiency possible. Our research confirms that in some ultimately unknown quantity, but it's very substantial, energy efficiency is our most cost-effective approach to lowering our carbon intensity. We need a firm commitment to low and zero carbon and greenhouse gas emitting generation resources. That commitment should include an expanded loan guarantee program for nuclear, and I thank Senator Domenici especially for his work on this for a number of years. It also should include further support for carbon capture and sequestration, and here I would commend Chairman Boucher for his work in the House. And I agree entirely with my colleague from General Electric. We need a commitment to a production tax credit for renewables, one that lasts. The on-again, off-again PTC is untenable. Indeed, energy policy must be sustainable in this country if energy is to be sustainable. Finally, we need Congress's continued support of competitive wholesale markets. The FERC has just completed a comprehensive re-examination of wholesale markets and has taken further steps to encourage energy efficiency and demand management. Those seeking to undo competitive markets would undo work that the Congress and this committee has done for 30 years. To change course at this time in the face of massive investment requirements would be a grave error. Recent work by the Brattle Group predicts that the electricity industry will need $1.5 trillion in investment over the next 2 decades, plus the investment to address climate change. You simply can't do that efficiently without competition. Recent studies show that competitive markets have been the most friendly for wind generation development and also for inducing customers to respond to rising prices by adjusting their electricity demand. Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, we thank you for your attention. We urge early action on all 3 of these fronts. And meanwhile, we at Exelon have put together a plan to reduce, offset, or displace our carbon footprint by 2020. We are hard at work on it, and we'll try to do our part. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Roberts.
Good afternoon. My name is Jim Roberts. I am the chairman and CEO of Foundation Coal Corporation, one of our nation's leading coal producers. I am also the chair of the National Mining Association, the National Trade Association and voice of the U.S. mining industry. I thank you for the opportunity to appear today and participate in the summit on behalf of both Foundation Coal and the NMA. There are three main messages or points I would like to leave you with today. The first is quite simple. Coal is not merely important to the United States and to the world, it is indispensable. Coal is a prime source of energy throughout the world, including here and in the United States, where it generates more than 50% of our nation's electricity. We cannot maintain U.S. electric reliability and energy security without coal, nor can we realistically expect the increased use of coal elsewhere in the world to stop or reverse course. My second point is in the response to those who would argue that increasing the use of coal in addressing climate change concerns are irreconcilable objectives. What is irreconcilable is trying to address climate change without supporting full-bore the development and deployment of advanced clean coal technologies, including, most importantly, carbon capture and storage, otherwise known as CCS. Between 1990 and 2030, global CO2 emissions are projected to increase by approximately 99%. If the United States and every OECD nation stopped using coal altogether, the projected increase in CO2 emissions would still be 75%. In other words, we could tear down every coal plant in the United States and the entire industrialized world tomorrow without seriously addressing climate change concerns. To be clear, Foundation Coal and the National Mining Association support the timely adoption of comprehensive federal climate legislation. The current state of indecision on climate change is holding us back as a nation from doing the things we need to do today to meet our current and future energy needs. But taking coal from our energy mix is not an answer. Today's energy crisis is about cost or price, principally the price of gasoline. If we don't begin to act soon, tomorrow's energy crisis, as it relates to electricity, will not just be about price, but about supply as well. It's one thing to pay a high price for energy, it's another not to have it there at any price. All one need do is read the 2007 Long-Term Reliability Assessment from NERC to see the handwriting on the wall as to the coming crisis in electricity. The question or challenge before us is, how do we keep using coal to meet our energy needs but reduce CO2 emissions? The answer is carbon capture and storage. This leads me to my third point, that the United States, and namely the federal government, must do much more to support and accelerate development and deployment of CCS. Over the past 10 years, the federal government has spent approximately $3.5 billion on clean coal R&D and demonstration projects. In the context of the challenge we face, this is wholly inadequate. And there's no greater example of federal efforts falling short in this arena than a Department of Energy's incomprehensible decision to withdraw support from the Future Gen project at Mattoon, Illinois. We walk a fine line in attempting to deal with the energy-climate equation. We need to push technology as hard and as fast as we can, yet we cannot afford to get ahead of technology. Carbon mandates or restrictions that are not in sync with technology development threatens great harm to our economy and the well-being of our citizens, and in turn, public support of our efforts to address climate change concerns. Let me speak to those who express support for carbon capture and storage and other advanced clean coal technologies, but who suggest that we should not build any new coal-fired generating capacity in this country until CCS is fully deployable. There are two very serious problems with this thinking. One, by depriving us of much-needed electricity generating capacity in the near term, it threatens to drive us closer to the crisis in electricity supply of which NERC has warned. Two, a moratorium on new coal-fired capacity that does not include full-scale CCS deployment will stop CCS development dead in its tracks. It is important to understand no one will ever build an IGCC plant with CCS if we don't first build several IGCC plants without it. Likewise, we can't expect anyone to build a plant with a 65% carbon capture if we don't first build plants with 20% capture. That's with any kind of technological advance, we have to walk before we can run.
Did you know that?
Michael Phelps would have not have won 8 gold medals in Beijing if years ago he would not have been allowed in the pool until he was able to set a new world record. We have to start somewhere. We need to push advanced clean coal technologies, including CCS, as rapidly and as hard as we can. But we cannot afford to ban all new coal plants prior to those technologies being commercially ready. To do so would threaten our economy and our energy security and would have the devastating impact from a climate perspective of squashing the very technology, CCS, that is absolutely central and an essential element of any realistic climate plan. We need to put the pedal to the metal on clean coal and CCS, not slam on the brakes on anything short of perfect. Otherwise, we will solve neither the energy nor the climate challenges ahead of us. I thank you for the opportunity to appear today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Steenland, go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senators, for the opportunity to appear today. I appear today in my capacity as Chairman of the Board of Directors of the Air Transport Association and as the CEO of Northwest Airlines. I'd like to make the following points. First, a strong U.S. airline industry is essential to the strength and growth of the U.S. economy. High oil prices are challenging our ability to meet the needs of our passengers and the communities we serve across the country. In today's environment, airlines are pure price takers. We have no choice but to purchase fuel irrespective of the price. In addition to the historically high prices we face, we also have been faced recently with very significant price volatility, which is making business planning extremely difficult. Fuel is now 40 to 50% of total operating costs of U.S. airlines. From June 2007 to July of 2008, oil went from $67 a barrel to $147 a barrel, a 119% increase. That $80 increase has added over $34 billion to the U.S. airlines' 2008 fuel bill. Unstable, unpredictable, high oil prices have led to airline fare increases and significant service reductions. To help address that, we advocate for a multifaceted energy policy which includes the following. First, expand domestic supplies by environmentally responsible drilling. Today we import nearly 5.5 billion barrels of oil a year at more than a $600 billion cost to the U.S. Looking to increase supplies, including lifting the ban on OCS drilling, will help reduce oil prices and boost U.S. and local economies. We believe this can be accomplished safely from an environmental standpoint. As our own actions demonstrate, we are also very strong advocates of conservation and technology. Unfortunately, today we cannot partake, as I said before, of alternative fuels. In addition to addressing critical supply issues, we also want to address what we believe is excessive speculation in energy markets. In the opinions of many, the high volume of paper future investments and contracts have helped accelerate the run-up in oil prices. From 2003 to July of 2008, commodity index investments grew from $13 billion to over $300 billion, and commodity prices tripled in that time. Changes in supply and demand fundamentals and the devaluation of the dollar, while contributors, cannot alone account for the massive oil spike we have witnessed. And we believe that the amount of financial trading that has come in has clearly facilitated those price increases. We're not alone in that view. Experts around the world have also acknowledged this linkage, whether it's the United States Conference on Trade and Development, reports that have come out of MIT, Lehman Brothers, and Citibank, a report earlier this week introduced by any number of senators, and where actions by the government of Japan, the European Central Bank, and OPEC leaders have also acknowledged this linkage. We suggest that the mere threat of legislation to curb excessive speculation has contributed to the bursting of the oil bubble that we have seen recently, where over the last several weeks, oil has gone from $147 a barrel to $100 a barrel yesterday. And while this relief is important, we hope that that permanent legislation will be enacted to help facilitate this. Most of all, we need transparent, well-regulated markets to prevent excessive speculation from returning,
Senator,
to ensure
Mr.
that
Chairman,
regulators can...
Could you hold a minute, sir?
Sure.
Senator Bingaman, could we have him go back about 2 sentences or 3 in his testimony? I missed something in there.
Yeah,
My
is it
fault.
possible to just repeat the last few sentences of your testimony there so Senator Domenici could?
Sure, I would be glad to.
Thank you.
Recently, though, the oil markets prices have gone from $147 a barrel to $100 a barrel over the course of the last several weeks. And we believe a contributor to that reduction has been the introduction and the prospect of legislation to address financial speculation in the commodity markets. We need transparent, well-regulated markets to prevent excessive speculation, to ensure that regulators can detect and address concerns that could lead to big run-up in prices, and to reduce volatility caused by big swings in speculative activity. We urge the Congress to reach a comprehensive bipartisan approach to energy legislation before this session ends this September. Thank you very much.
Started on the left. Go across. Yes, Mr. Cohn, go right ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senators, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Gary Cohn, President and Co-Chief Operating Officer of Goldman Sachs. Thank you, Senators Bingaman and Domenici, for allowing me to participate and share Goldman Sachs' perspective. There are few topics more important than the subject of this hearing. Finding a solution to achieve a more secure, reliable, sustainable, affordable energy future for American people is very important. Goldman Sachs is a global investment bank and securities firm with more than 30,000 people worldwide, and our people are involved in numerous aspects of the energy markets. As an active participant in the energy sector, our strategy is to act as an advisor, a financier, a principal, and a manager of risk on behalf of our clients, while operating at the center of global financial markets. We work as an advisor to numerous leading energy companies worldwide. As a financier for global energy projects and companies, we have helped to raise over $400 billion in the last 5 years. As a co-investor in a diversified portfolio of energy companies, we have invested more than $8 billion in companies globally that employ more than 100,000 people worldwide. As a manager of risk on behalf of our clients, we have facilitated approximately $220 billion in hedges across a variety of industries and products from companies in the transportation, oil and gas, power, metals, and agricultural industries. Neither private capital alone nor government policy is enough to incentivize the development of the advanced energy technologies our country needs. We must work together to bring balanced solutions. Otherwise, high energy prices will be the only catalyst the market will respond to in order to invest in the modern energy economy. Such solutions should also address the importance and the pressing challenges of protecting our environment and addressing climate change. Over the past decade, Goldman Sachs has invested heavily in the development of clean energy technologies, including wind, solar, geothermal, biofuels, and clean coal. We also have an environmental policy framework in place that requires our firm to take into consideration the impact of all our investment decisions may have on the environment. Again, I commend you for convening this forum, and thank you for allowing me to share Goldman Sachs' perspective.
Thank you very much. Mr. Wagner, we're glad to have you here. Please go right ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Pleasure to be with you today, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak on such an important topic. Last year, Congress passed an energy bill that focused primarily on promoting energy conservation. Among the provisions in that bill was a dramatic 40% increase in fuel economy requirements for cars and light trucks. General Motors and our competitors are hard at work making sure that we can achieve this objective, which requires a huge commitment of research and development, engineering, and capital spending, and access to capital to fund those investments. We believe last year's energy bill has laid the groundwork for a comprehensive and forward-looking U.S. energy policy, one that addresses both energy demand and energy supply. Speaking for GM, we think it's time for the U.S. to take control of our energy future. As a nation, we have the capability to do this, and faster than most people think. It will require a massive investment in new technologies. It will require a commitment from all sectors of the U.S. economy, a partnership among government, industry, academia, and the American public. It will require a constancy of purpose, a long-term national commitment to improving our energy security despite the inevitable short-term swings in the price of oil. And most importantly, it will require leadership, direction, and vision from our government. In this regard, I want to commend the work that the bipartisan Gang of 10 is doing. This comprehensive approach of this group to promote new energy supplies and encourage the development of and purchase of advanced technology vehicles is laudable. Many of the provisions being developed by this group should be included in the next energy bill. Looking specifically at the automotive sector, our industry has a real opportunity to move away from our traditional, almost complete reliance on oil as the source of energy that powers our vehicles. In particular, we see tremendous opportunities to develop and promote the use of biofuels, batteries, and hydrogen fuel cells. To achieve the improvements that are possible in the transportation sector, it's important that we have a clear consensus on what's required to bring these new technologies to market in volume. We as automakers need to take the lead by developing the technologies and then driving their costs down so consumers can afford them. But there are other important roles that need to be played as well. In short, we need a clear, long-term policy, consistency of direction, alignment of regulation, and a strong commitment from all sectors of American society to develop and implement the technologies that will allow us to achieve our mutual goals. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you all. Thank you all for your excellent testimony. Let me start and ask a question or two, and then call on Senator Domenici. Let me ask you, Mr. Wagner, one of the issues that obviously we're struggling with here this week and the next couple of weeks in Congress is the issue of additional government loan guarantees or loans for the auto industry. Could you describe your thoughts? We passed a bill that was signed into law by the President that made provision for loans to retool the auto industry. What more do you think is appropriate or essential, and what would be the benefit of Congress doing more in this area as you see it?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I think what we need to do next is enable those loans which were authorized under the Energy Security Act last year, $25 billion direct loans for suppliers and automakers of all varieties. We need to provide the appropriation to enable those authorized loans to be extended. We need to very quickly draft the regulations to allow the loans to be extended. And we need to make sure that the regulations under which they're extended are reasonable and consistent with the objective of the Energy Act. If that is done, then I think the $25 billion included in the energy bill last year would be very helpful in enabling the industry to move more rapidly, particularly in the context that since the bill was passed last year, the capital market conditions have worsened significantly, and so the availability of credit is much tighter for companies of all shapes and sizes, whether they be the smallest supplier or the largest OEM. And obviously the conditions in the U.S. economy and the U.S. market have weakened dramatically, and so the ability to fund these investments from our normal cash flow from our business is significantly retarded. So I think particularly right now, if the Congress could move rapidly to enable the loans that were approved to be funded and dispersed, again, only against projects which bring significant improvements in fuel economy, that would be a tremendous help to the auto sector.
Let me just be sure I understand. Your thought is that the authorizing language that we included in last year's bill was the appropriate language to put in. You're saying we now need to fund the provisions that were previously enacted. Is that right?
What I'm saying is we think the amount, $25 billion, is a very good amount to ensure that we can stay on the path that we've been on. Regulations do need to be written. Funding needs to be authorized. I would say the specific terms that were included last year are not comprehensive enough from our perspective, and so we would like to suggest some amplification of those terms, I think very much in the spirit of the initial terms that were suggested, but I would say somewhat amplified.
Could you be a little more specific as to what you mean there by amplifying the terms?
Right.
What are the problems that you see with the language that we enacted last year?
The language enacted last year basically allows investments for products that improve fuel economy in a single step by 25%. The language we would like to see expanded would be to provide funding for projects which are consistent with the commitments in fuel economy, actually 25 and then 40%, which we've agreed to, but don't require every single project to cover a full 25%. Let me give you a specific example. It will be very expensive for us to apply our hybrid system, our General Motors hybrid system, across a broad range of vehicles. Generally, this hybrid system that we think has the broadest consumer appeal because it's lower cost will not by itself in one step get a 25% fuel economy. So basically dramatically expanding this kind of hybrid system would not be eligible for funding under the rule as it's initially written. And I understand from our competitors, many of the projects they would undertake, which would enact significant improvements in fuel economy, 10, 15, 20%, would not be eligible for this funding support. So what we're talking about is trying to offer language which would be, I think, consistent with the spirit of the law, but enable projects that don't each individually get 25% or more improvement to be covered.
Thank you very much. Senator Domenici.
Well, Mr. Chairman, let me say I don't think that I have enough time to ask each of you questions I would like to ask. You have raised some very interesting points, each one of you, and you could be of more help than I'm going to be able to solicit in my questions, but I'm going to try a couple. Let me just start with you, Mr. Rowe. First, I want to compliment you and your company for your farsightedness. You're a big holder of nuclear power plants as part of your delivery system, and that has proved to be very wise looking at the market. And you also are confident about the future in that you have put your company in a position where you would like to get licenses from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to add to your fleet by building new power plants that are nuclear. Is that not correct?
That is, sir.
And you have found that the new, I don't intend to treat you as if you're the one down there doing the applying. I know you're the head man at the top, but I think you know that the answer to these questions. Today we have a much more modern way to file the applications than we did the last time they were filed. We've used a disk that is a little computer disk that is the entire application. As before, we used to have a pickup truck full of those things that we were sending over to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I guess that kind of surprised you when this process was taking place and you were spending your few millions of dollars to get the license work ready. Is that not true?
Well, the new processes at the Commission are in fact very helpful, and what is most helpful of all that they do is the approval of construction and operation in one basic proceeding, so you don't run the risk of relitigating the same issues when you start and when you end. I
would ask you, it's a matter of record, that I don't expect you to know the answer, but we have been told unequivocally over and over by the Regulatory Commission, whom I personally have great confidence in. I think it's a fabulous commission for a difficult time in our history. But we've been told that the first applications that there's no way to get around it, are going to take 42 months to get from day to file it to completion. I would ask if you and your experts, without offending the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, don't worry about that. If you would tell us where there are places that we might save time, even if they are not general. Maybe you save you save time only if certain conditions are met. There are a lot of power plants now that are applied that don't seem to have the kind of opposition that we had 25 years ago, and it might be that we could do some of this quicker. And I would like to just pose that to you, not for now, but would you tell our committee that you will do that for us in due course?
I would be happy to get you and the chairman and the members of the committee the best letter I can on that. Personally, I believe that the best thing the industry can do to help the commission in this is to submit the most standardized designs possible, and the best thing the Congress can do to help the commission is remind them how badly we need nuclear energy in a low-carbon economy.
Now, let me move over to GE. I'm fully aware of what you do, and I've had an opportunity to meet you before, and you have a very wide portfolio under your particular hierarchy of your company. But I might just ask, you're also in the nuclear power business, and everybody should know that it isn't a non-competitive business. Even though we have not been in it for a while, there are some powerful competitors, from Areva out of France to English companies to a lot of them, Japan with Toshiba. Let me ask, how is GE doing? Are you up front, big competitors? How many plants have you applied for that have GE power plants in them?
We are very committed to nuclear power. My opening comments were centered around wind, but we're equally committed to nuclear power. We've been in this business for over 50 years. We're working with the NRC and many of our customers on licensing the next generation of design. Roughly 1/3 of the world's nuclear plants are operated on GE technology. So we are very committed, but we're going to need to see more demand in the United States.
More what?
Today, roughly, there's about 104 reactors in the U.S. The U.S. is a leader in nuclear energy. We've done it before. We can do it again. But I agree, as you look at a low-carbon future, nuclear has to be part of the solution, and it's a part of the GE strategy to aggressively invest in nuclear energy.
Mr. Chairman, I have only one last question, and I would like to ask Mr. Roberts this question with reference to the military. The United States military is working with various developers of liquids from coal to use as transportation fuel for the military. And I would just like to ask you how important that activity is to the future of coal, and how can it serve the country, in your opinion?
Well, I think the first thing I'd like to point out about coal to liquid, Senator, is that it's not a research and development process. It's been around at least since the 1930s.
Correct.
And if anybody has ever flown from South Africa, Johannesburg, the plane that you had taken off in and was probably fueled by a combination of aviation fuel from traditional sources as well as aviation fuel produced from coal to liquids. So it's already here, and it's a process that we have. We look at coal to liquids in the coal industry as an additional source of a domestic supply of energy that we have here at home. Coal makes up 90% of all the energy, fossil fuel energies that the United States has. It makes up 60% of all the world's energy. It's the coal to liquids, the fuel that's made from coal to liquids is cleaner than aviation fuel or diesel fuel that's made from petroleum products. It's made from a source that's domestic. It improves our energy security, and it has the potential of creating thousands and thousands of jobs here at home. So it's very important not only to the coal industry, we believe it's important to the national energy.
Let me just be very specific. I should have been. Section 526 is kind of commonly known now in your industry. It's the section of law that was passed that makes it very difficult to import Canadian fuel because of the requirement that it match up against a certain criteria that is hard to achieve. Are you aware of that problem, are you not?
I'm not specifically aware of the exact restrictions there, Senator.
All right. I guess I'll ask somebody else about 526, Section 5. I think it's very important to the coal business, and we're trying to solve a problem that exists. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield back now, and I thank you for the time.
All right, thank you very much. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And gentlemen, thank you for what you do and how you contribute to our country. Mr. Steenland, I wanted to underscore on behalf of Senator Levin and me a very important part of your testimony. You're the CEO of Northwest Airlines. And you said when a bunch of us had filed speculation, anti-oil future contract speculation bills, and you said that in your testimony was a major contributing factor to the drop of oil from 147 to 100. Is that a correct characterization of your testimony? And if so, how much, as a result of filing those bills, did Northwest save?
Senator, that was our testimony. I think it's very difficult to apportion how much is due to the potential of additional regulation and lawmaking on the financial side of speculation versus strengthening of the dollar, weaknesses in global economies. But when you look at over the span of literally 8 weeks, when oil goes from 147 to 100, and there's no other demonstrable external change that can explain it, clearly a contributing factor in our judgment had to believe the leadership that you, Senator Levin, and others provided on this issue. And to just give you a sense of the magnitude, for us, every dollar of change in crude oil is $42 million of annual cost. So that $40 reduction was $1.6 billion in savings that we would have realized on an annual basis. So that is meaningful, significant, and it's clearly going to help us avoid further reductions, look to minimize further increases in fares, and we would encourage that the threat of legislation become the reality of law to try to provide additional reporting, additional transparency, the opportunity for the CFTC to impose position limits when appropriate, and to be in a position to do that across the board.
I hope so, and Senator Levin indeed has been a leader in this for a number of years. Mr. Wagner, I wanted to ask you, first of all, I want you to know that I learned to drive a pickup truck. And I started driving. You could drive in Florida then at age 14, and it was a General Motors product. And ever since, I've had either General Motors or Ford products. I preface that by asking you, I believe that you really need financial incentives to retool the industry. But what's going to happen is, because of your financial condition, that's not going to be enough. And you all are going to come to us with some kind of rescue package and ask us to rescue you. And you're looking at somebody, when I was a young congressman, I voted for the Chrysler bailout. But I must admit, it is hard for me to do that when each year that I've been in the Senate, you all, collectively Detroit, have opposed us and beat us every year when we have tried to increase miles per gallon standards. So could you respond, please, as to why we should now come to the financial rescue?
Yeah, thanks, Senator. Yeah, to be clear, what we're asking for is basically the fulfillment of what was included in the Energy Act that was passed last year. That Energy Act, as you know, included a significant increase, 40%.
That was the first time in the 8 years I've been in the Senate.
Well, it's a big one.
We were able to get that through, but every year Detroit opposed us, and we couldn't get any miles per gallon increase.
Well, Senator, what I can tell you is that the increase that was approved last year, as you recall, was supported, I think, unanimously by the auto industry. And as part of that significant retooling that would be required, the bill included direct loan provision of $25 billion. So what we're asking for is that the provision for the loans now be funded and be enabled to support the manufacturers to invest in these new technologies. I'm not here today, and I don't know of my colleagues from other auto companies either asking for any bailouts. What we've said very specifically is the bill that we supported and you all approved required a significant improvement in fuel economy, which we agreed to, and as part of that, the loan program was included, and particularly given the fact that the industry conditions have gotten, not auto, but general industry conditions and credit conditions have gotten so difficult, it would be very helpful if that funding could be approved.
Senator Bond.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize for having missed this morning's session. I had a number of meetings set up, and I don't serve on energy. I serve on environment and public works, and we have probably had a little too much activity in the energy field. I would join with Mr. Roberts in saying that the cancellation of Future Gen was incomprehensible. I said the same in much longer and more explicit letters to the Department of Energy and other relevant bodies. But I also serve on the Intelligence Committee, where I have to go right now to talk about the national security implications of energy. And we are seeing, I think, a real threat that energy has become possibly a next weapon in competition, not always friendly competition with other nations. But we are here today to talk about doing something, as Mr. Wagner said, to take control of our energy future. Setting aside the national security implications, it is probably the most important thing I hear when I go back to people in Missouri. It doesn't matter whether you're a family, whether you're worrying about going to a job or taking your kids to work, whether you're a farmer who's getting killed by high energy prices, workers who are seeing their jobs disappear, airline travelers who find their services cut off. And I'm delighted we have representatives of the airline and automotive industries today, because you all are classic examples of why this is such a problem. And I think all of us recognize that a little price decrease is not good enough. We need to lower gas prices, and that's why I personally don't think a little offshore drilling is enough. We need to open up as much as we can. We don't need a little bit more. I think we need a lot more. And I have some questions that primarily are for the first panel, but I would like to comment from anyone who offered. The Gang of 10 proposal, which is a good step forward, would still leave 70% of the offshore areas on our outer continental shelf closed to production. Will opening up, I think it's about 14% more of the outer continental shelf, make a difference in oil prices in the view of any of you? Mr. Cohn, maybe you're in the financial area. Maybe you could comment on that.
Well, I would comment that any increase in supply will help the price of oil.
Granted.
Since it's our fundamental belief that we are in a supply-demand market, and supply and demand basically set the price. Anytime you can affect one of those two legs of the equation, you're going to help the equation out. So either increasing supply or conserving on demand is going to be a help.
And we need to do all of them. But, for example, the House has come up with a plan that would only open up about 3% of the 10 billion barrels of oil off our Pacific coast. And I imagine for that small an increment, you're not going to get much bang for the buck. Is that fair? Mr. Steenland?
I think just echoing what Mr. Cohn said, the more the market perceives that additional supply is going to come online, I think the more favorably the market will respond, and that will impact positively with respect to lower prices.
That's an economics question. I want to bounce back to Mr. Cohn. We're talking about speculation. Obviously, speculators provide a useful role. From what I've seen, the money in the market on long-term energy futures are people investing for the long run. Retirement funds, say, predicting oil is going to go to $200 or $250. And my question is, how much did talking about dealing with speculation have an impact on the price, or what kind of impact did lifting the executive moratorium on offshore drilling have?
Well, look, I think we're all happy that the price of oil has come down in recent days and recent months. That's a good thing for the economy. It's a good thing for the world economy. It's a good thing for everyone involved. The reality of the price coming down, I think, may be just a mere coincidence that the price of oil came down while there was discussion going on curbing speculation in the United States. Remember, the oil market is a global market. A barrel of oil is fungible anywhere in the world. It can be delivered anywhere in the world, and people can trade oil anywhere in the world. I don't really ever believe in coincidences, but there seems to be a coincidence here between the talk and the economic picture that changed quite dramatically in the world. I think most of us are aware that we've gone through a fairly dramatic change in economic views and economic outlooks, not just here in the United States and Europe, but in Asia and the rest of the world. And that has coincided with the decline in price. You know, an interesting fact that I would just throw out here, I know that you're all aware that the CFTC just finished a very rigorous study of the oil market. And I think for the first time ever, we've all been able to see all of the data accumulated in one place, where we've literally seen 100% of the index speculators disclosed who they are, what they are. The CFTC has done an interesting job in gathering the data and being able to tell you if we had exchange limits or if we had position limits in place, who would have been in excess of those position limits and who would have been in excess of those exchange limits. I think there's been a rampant view that there have been hundreds of investors who have taken positions well in excess of current existing exchange limits. What the data actually found out in the non-commercial category in WTI, which is the U.S. oil grade that's delivered in this country, there were 6 clients that had a position in excess of current exchange speculative position limits. One of them was the United States hedge fund. Ironically, it had the largest position. It was on the short side. They were short 14,700 lots of WTI. 2 of them were European pension funds, long-term investors, as you talked about, on the long side. One of them was an Asian sovereign wealth fund on the long side. One of them was a United States long-only asset manager. And the last one was a Canadian pension fund on the short side. So when you got all the data in one place, trying to understand this dramatic effect of speculators, you found that there were 6 clients on a global basis that had positions in excess of speculative limits. So again, I get back to my original response. If we can increase supply in any way, shape, or form and diminish demand in any way, shape, or form, we will have a better oil price, and that will be better for all of us.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. May I ask very quickly, Mr. Steenland and Mr. Wagner,
if you could do so quickly.
Just how much impact oil prices have had on your employment and your future prospect?
Senator, Northwest Airlines, along with most of the rest of the U.S. airline industry, we will be about 10% smaller in the fourth quarter of this year than we were in the fourth quarter of last year. That's almost entirely oil related, and we'll be approximately 2,500 to 3,000 full-time equivalent employees fewer this year than last year.
Hard to speculate just on one factor, but I would say the overall economic decline, partly driven by higher oil prices, financial market weakness, obviously as the U.S. auto market now running the weakest it's run probably since 1993, and you know, the ramifications have been huge. We announced plans to eventually cease production at 4 truck plants, which you know, that in and of itself would be 10 to 15,000 people, and frankly, the ramifications for us and our industry have been significantly greater. So obviously, the latest economic down cycle has been very difficult for the auto industry.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you to all of you. Welcome to Mr. Steenland. Northwest Airlines is, we hope, for as long as we can in the near future, our hometown airline. And I was curious. I know, Mr. Steenland, when this the speculation issue came up, you got many of your customers to write in, and we were deluged with emails. Could you talk about what you heard from customers during that time?
Well, I think what we heard is not too dissimilar what you and everyone here hears when you go home for your work periods, and that energy is of an extraordinary high priority and concern. I think it's a reminder of how critically important air service is to economies, to the way people lead their lives these days. We are entirely dependent on energy, as it's now become 40 to 50% of our cost structure, and the extraordinary run-up in prices, which we think is where speculation has been a contributor, has clearly had an impact not just on us, but on the communities we serve and the customers that we have responsibility for.
I was listening to Mr. Cohn, and I know there are other studies, recent studies, showing different things about speculation. We have the mere fact that the prices went up 25% in a few-month period, and we didn't see that kind of increase in demand, certainly not in the United States, not worldwide. Do you want to just talk a little bit about your interpretation on the front line of the speculation issue, Mr. Steenland?
Well, I think, you know, we, as to the, you know, the CFTC study, we're glad they did it. I think there are some questions as to the accuracy and the dependability of it. We think there ought to be an institutionalized reporting obligation, so we're not simply dependent on, you know, an ad hoc study that the CFTC does, but where there's ongoing reporting obligations, so they have a full, constant, regular view of the entirety of the trading markets, and there's transparency, and that they are in a position to impose position limits, not just on the regulated exchanges, but on the over-the-counter markets as well. And we think that's very hard to argue with, and we think that's a good bit of regulatory policy for this important agency to have on such a critically important commodity.
Because I was frustrated. We had the chair of the CFTC, and I was saying to him, as a prosecutor, I always liked all the tools I could have, even if I didn't use them. And he didn't seem interested in having more tools to regulate those markets. But Mr. Wagner, turning to the rest of the topic at hand that we focused on this morning, I'm in the group of 20, and one of the things that really interested me was the incentives to develop this next generation of hybrid and electric cars and trucks. And I'll ask you what I asked this morning. One of the things I keep hearing is just the battery technology is just not where we want it to be, at least not produced in this country. And I know the Chevy Volt is coming out in 2 years and those kinds of things, but could you tell me where we are with the battery technology and how we can best tailor our incentives so it's produced in this country?
Yes, the premise of your question is, Senator, exactly in line with our findings as we sort of scour the world for capability to get the Chevy Volt to market on the time frame that we've committed to. It is fair to say that much of the technology in battery today is outside the U.S. I would say generally concentrated in Japan, where accessing the technology is difficult, and Korea. And a senator asked me earlier today, why is that true? And I think it's pretty clear, because those countries have, for 20 years or so, made it a national policy to encourage the development of battery technology. We in the U.S. have not done that, and as a result are way behind. That's the bad news. I think the good news is that as we look to a future where we shift automotive propulsion from mechanical to electrical, over time, that would mean, if we are successful, demand for millions of batteries, which provides a great business opportunity. And so I don't think this is a battle that the U.S. has lost, but I do think heavy support and investment by the U.S. government in battery research, productionizing batteries, and certainly what would be very helpful to us and consumers, the early adopters of these technologies. I can assure you the first few Chevy Volts we build are going to be very, very expensive vehicles. We will eat a lot of the cost.
So I should wait for a while.
No, the good news is we will subsidize your purchase. But what would I think help, and what is generally comprehended in much of the legislation in discussion of this topic, are consumer incentives. I think we have to recognize that as we bring these new technologies on, we're running against a tough target. The internal combustion engine fueled by petroleum is very low cost and very high quality. And so as we bring in new technologies, consumer tax credits, incentives are going to be very helpful as well.
And then one last question, Mr. Kronicki, I liked what you said about how important the production tax credit is. Obviously, that's in our legislation as well for a 3-year extension or something like that to make sure this thing has been going off 1 year, then it's off for 6 months, and it's led to problems in investment. I just got a report today from the Center for American Progress that showed that the U.S. can create 2 million jobs over 2 years by investing in rapid green economic jobs, and it actually showed that with $100 billion in investment, you could create 4 times more jobs than spending the same of money within the oil industry. Could you talk a little bit about why you think that we could more quickly get more jobs in, knowing that I also, many of us support a combination of things, but why these green jobs, something new to so many people in this country, green technology could support more jobs?
If I look at the business I run, we have over 10,000 engineers. Many of those engineers are working in renewable technology. Those jobs didn't exist in GE 6 years ago. So as we build leadership in the United States, it's a source of tremendous exports in manufacturing, high-paying engineering jobs. And I think the same could be done in nuclear energy, cleaner coal. So as we build leadership in this country, it will create exports and lots of high-paying jobs here at home.
Thank you.
Senator Conrad is next. He's agreed to defer to Senator Levin for some questions. Go ahead.
First, just thank Senator Conrad for deferring just for a minute, and that's all I will take. And this is just for Mr. Wagner. You gave us a very good example of where a minor modification in Section 136 would make it more practical in terms of achieving its goals. If you could submit for the record for the committee the other needed modifications in order to achieve that part of the law which we passed last year, I think it would be very helpful. But you could do that for the record if you would.
Be pleased to do that,
I'm familiar with them, but I think that the full committee needs to be familiar with them.
Be pleased to do that.
And thank you. And also one other question, Mr. Wagner. Did you speak for the industry in your testimony?
Yes, I did. We have, even as recently as the last couple of days, I've had extensive conversations with my colleagues at Ford and Chrysler and Mr. Gettelfinger from the UAW and his staff. So within that group, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Conrad.
Senator Conrad, go ahead.
Thank you, Senator Levin, and thanks again to the chairman of the committee for organizing this summit. And thanks to the ranking member for his participation, and thank you for really producing an outstanding day. I think the witnesses have been just exceptional, Mr. Chairman, and Senator Domenici. I think you can feel very good about what you've done to help the Senate grapple with this issue. I'd say first to Mr. Wagner, the gang of 10, as the press dubbed us, now a group of 20, and with more senators ready to come on board over the weekend. In our proposal, we have $7.5 billion to help the domestic industry retool. That's not loans, that's direct money, because we think it's critically important to reducing our dependence on foreign oil, to move to the vehicles of the future. Number two, we have $5 billion over 10 years in battery technology research because our group became convinced during the deliberations that is absolutely essential to America's competitive position. Could you help us understand if those investments are in line with what your thinking is, and are they the right priorities?
Thank you, Senator. To be honest, I wasn't familiar with all of the specifics of the items you're working on, so can't comment exactly on the numbers. But I think the strategic direction you're citing is very much consistent with the conversation we just had on battery technology, where we think that is a fundamental building block for the future of the auto industry. And while the U.S. is behind, it would be a shame not to get back into that tremendous opportunity. As a general rule, our thought is that actually the U.S. and the world is run with automotive technology driven by petroleum for 100 years. And we are now at an inflection point, and whether it's over the next 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years, the industry is going to fundamentally evolve in its sources of power. So it is, I think, a very appropriate time for obviously, the manufacturers have a tremendous interest in it, but I think from the perspective of the U.S. government, if we wish to continue to have a robust and strong manufacturing engineering sector and the automotive side, which is the largest manufacturing sector in the country, it's a very good time to get a direction from the Congress and support for the key technologies. So we very much would like to participate and comment and contribute to your deliberations.
Let me just say that I would say to all of you, the group of 20, the basic concept is we got to increase production, we've got to reduce demand. And we have adopted a strategy, not of just one thing or two things. We've adopted a strategy that involves support for renewables, conservation, improved efficiency, electric plug-in, geothermal, hydrogen, drilling offshore. And the senator from Missouri questioned how much we've expanded drilling offshore. Well, we have a phased approach to opening up offshore. We open the Eastern Gulf. We open up off of Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia. We open up off of Alaska. And we do it on a phased basis. We then have time to go out and do the seismic work to see what additional areas have real opportunity. Because just opening up, frankly, you can open up everywhere. The problem is the testimony we heard this morning from the representative of the major oil companies was we've got only 30 offshore rigs in the world, every one of them spoken for. So you can just say you're going to open up everything, but doesn't have meaning. It doesn't have meaning unless you've got the rigs to do it, unless you've got the trained personnel to do it. And the fact is we can only do it on a phased basis. So this notion that we just go and open up everything and all of a sudden everything's going to happen is not reality. Our group has tried to deal with reality. In addition, we've got provisions for nuclear power because we think we're going to have to expand nuclear power. We have clean coal, significant investment there. Let me just ask if I could, Mr. Konecki, do you think we're going in the right direction? This is 20 senators, 10 Democrats, 10 Republicans.
Absolutely. I think the answer is all. So we have to do a lot of many things. And if I look at just what's happened in renewable energy, in a relatively short period of time with good policy, the U.S. is leading the world. It's the most dynamic market. The U.S. is the Saudi Arabia of wind, and we're taking advantage of that. I think we got to keep building it out, and it'll have significant benefits, and it'll be totally consistent with any climate policy that is tackled in the next administration. So I think the group of 20 is terrific, and I applaud your efforts.
Mr. Rowe, do you think we're headed in the right direction?
Yes, sir. Indeed, I do, and I'm very grateful for the effort. I think particularly your focus on the climate change legislation and coming up with a practical bill that includes the economy is very important. Let me just say, though, that while I agree with Mr. Konecki that the answer is all, they come at dreadfully different prices. And we think that at least in the early stages, energy efficiency measures are the places where you get the most bang for the least dollars. We just don't know how long that lasts. On the other hand, we look at wind, and we may be the Saudi Arabia of wind, but sometimes it costs almost as much. We think the cost in terms of dollars per barrel, dollars per ton of carbon dioxide of relying on wind is in the $80 to $100 a ton pre-subsidy, whereas Gas, you may be talking 20 to 40, and nuclear more like 40, even at the high prices we're looking at today.
All right.
So the point I'm getting to is you need all, the group is entirely right to push all, but when we put our consumer hats on, the cost to the consumer is very different from one of these technologies to the other.
Mr. Roberts?
Well, I certainly agree with the others here, and to Mr. Rowe's point about cost and representing the coal industry, I want to make it clear on one point that we believe that the full panoply of resources is the way we should go. Conservation, energy efficiency, oil, natural gas. But what we have to realize is that we cannot do it without our most abundant and affordable source of energy here at home, and that's coal.
We have a substantial, in our group of 20, a substantial investment in clean coal, because we agree with you. It's got to be part of an overall comprehensive package.
And yes, it does. Thank you.
Mr. Steenland, what would be your reaction?
Senator, we clearly support a broad-based, multifaceted approach. Unfortunately, on our side, airplanes don't work very well on wind, and the nuclear-powered airplane hasn't manifested itself yet. So we're still heavily dependent on crude oil and the refining of that crude oil into jet fuel. And to the extent we have invested billions of dollars in terms of conservation efforts through purchasing new, more fuel-efficient aircraft and the like to recognize the significant expense that we bear here. And when we look at it, why we support a broad-based bill, we tend to focus on what's in it to help control the supply or to expand the supply on the crude oil side, and to the extent that there is expansion of areas available for drilling, we think that's a constructive approach.
Mr. Cohn?
Mr. Senator, I agree with your premise. I agree with my distinguished colleagues on the panel. Look, I think the tax incentives that you have for wind and solar are very important. I think the loan guarantee program, very important. I think nuclear power, very important. Conservation, very important. Smart grid technology, expand and upgrade the transportation network, very important. All this takes enormous amount of capital. No one talks about the trillions of dollars we're talking about right now to rebuild the energy infrastructure of the United States. To attract that capital, you're going to have to compete with other markets and other alternatives for the capital. And the capital is going to tend to gravitate where it can get the highest rate of return with the most surety involved. And as long as we can create some rate of return with some predictability, we will be able to attract the capital into the system.
Mr. Wagner?
I agree as well, and appreciate the leadership of your group, because I think it very much is exactly the direction that we need to go to. I would just go back to a point I made in my testimony that as we have historically looked at alternatives in our sector and others, we've seen that when oil prices are high, everybody wants to do something new, and we're excited about it, and we get the investment cranked up, and oil prices go back down, and consumers tell us what they are going to buy. They tell us every day. And so I would simply say, as you and your colleagues look at this, the broad expanse is terrific, but we have to recognize there will be market factors that will move up and down. In those countries today that I mentioned earlier who are leading in battery technology had a persistent commitment to that technology, even when oil prices went down to whatever it was, $10 or $20 a barrel, not that long ago. And so I do think and would ask that your work comprehend a long vision and a commitment among all of us and a consistency of direction, so we don't find ourselves in situations such as we're encountering today.
That's what our bill contemplates, a 10-year, on the battery side, a 10-year commitment.
Terrific.
Let me see if Senator Domenici, do you have some additional questions or comments that you wanted to make? And,
Chairman, I'll follow you. Go ahead.
are there other members? Senator Nelson, go ahead.
Just one comment, Mr. Chairman. I just want to clarify to Senator Conrad's question to Mr. Steenland about the Gang of 20 proposal. They omit in their proposal addressing speculation. They say in their proposal they want to wait till the CFTC reports. And so I want you to have that information as to how you would like to react to that, because we're talking about action on this next week, Mr. Steenland. So tell me what you think.
Well, we've previously met with Senator Conrad and Senator Graham, and we conveyed our views as to the appropriateness of we thought in the urgency of including provisions in their package that addresses the speculation issue, and we would encourage them and hope that they would get to that point before all is said and done.
The report that's being referenced, I think, is coming September 15th. But our group, the gang of 20, I've supported the speculation piece. Within our group, there are differences on speculation. We tried in our proposal to influence the supply-demand relationship, but I strongly support the speculative legislation that Senator Nelson and others, Senator Dorgan and others have offered, because I think that is a key component as well.
Senator Klobuchar, did you have another question?
No, I'm just fine. I would
sorry.
like to.
I didn't realize Senator Nelson was still asking questions. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to conclude that thought about speculation. There was a report that was released Wednesday by Masters Capital Management Hedge Fund that said that financial speculators drove up oil prices, and then after the prices peaked on July the 11th, began a mass stampede for the exits. That's a quote. They pulled $39 billion out of the crude oil markets, Masters said,
What's the name of that?
leading to a sell-off of 127 million barrels of oil futures. Mr. Cohn, that seems to contradict or be at variance with what you had said. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I am quite aware of Mr. Masters' piece. Just for those of you who don't know, Mr. Masters is a hedge fund manager offshore in St. Croix who runs a equity fund that is very long transportation stocks and airline industries. I hope he does very well, by the way, in his position. Mr. Masters is not really an economist with formal training. There was a piece put out later in the week, you may be well aware of, Philip Verlinger put out a piece, who is a quite recognized economist, has served here in the Capitol as an economist on energy policies. And I'll take one moment to read his concluding paragraph for you. And this is a piece after the Masters piece. He sort of responds to the Masters piece. Let me conclude with a simple comment. The Accidental Hunt Brothers Act 2 by Michael W. Masters and Adam K. White is the worst example of junk economic analysis published in a very long time. The author demonstrates nothing in the article. It is devoid of any intellectual content. One can make a stronger case for a rooster's crow causing the sun to rise. Their report is utter and complete perversion of what we teach in economics.
Let me ask you about the New York Mercantile Exchange report. They concluded, this is about a week ago, that 81% of all of the oil futures contracts on the New York Mercantile Exchange were exchanges by speculators, not by commercial users of oil. Give us your opinion about that.
I think that the New York Mercantile, although I have enormous respect for them, and I have served on their board, and I've served on their executive committee in prior years, I think that unfortunately they lack the transparency of information, and that was why the CFTC, by your body, was asked to get involved and really create full disclosure and full transparency in what's going on in the market. I would put a lot more confidence in the CFTC data, where they have captured 90% of all market participants, including the over-the-counter market, which the NYMEX doesn't see. The NYMEX only sees those transactions which take place on their exchange, and equal and opposite transactions to that can take place in the over-the-counter market. And therefore, even though I know what they see, and I served on their control committee, which controls the liquidity of the contracts, I know they don't have very good information. That's why I was so interested in seeing the CFTC information that we were able to see yesterday, which really did, for the first time in the history of the commodity markets in the United States, really paint a relatively clear picture of what's going on.
Does Goldman Sachs...
And can I add one more thing to that? They tell you 81% of it's speculative. Now, that's also an interesting number because there are long speculators and there are short speculators. you could have longs and shorts net each other out. So you could basically have 40% long, 40% short. They cancel each other out. The other 20% of the market be real end users, but you could publish that you had 80% speculators in that market.
Does Goldman Sachs engage in the speculative market on oil futures contracts?
We engage in the oil market on behalf of our clients day in and day out. As I said in my opening comments, we have been the facilitator of over $220 billion of commodity hedges, where we act as an intermediary between our clients and the exchange. We provide our clients, like Northwest Airline, jet fuel hedges. There is no jet fuel contract in the world. We take the risk of selling them jet fuel hedges. We then hedge that into other similar products where we inherit the risk. So we are engaged in the markets on a global basis day in and day out.
Your client, Northwest Airlines, uses that oil from those futures contracts. Do you engage in the buying and selling of future oil contracts for clients that do not use that oil?
Well, the way the futures contract actually works, they engage in a financially settled hedge with us, and they use that as an insurance policy against price protection. They actually source their jet fuel from a third-party physical provider. We do engage in transactions with people who are not ultimate producers or consumers of the commodity.
Okay, so the answer to my question is yes. Now, the simple follow-up question is...
Let's do this one follow-up, and then Senator Klobuchar is going to be anxious to get in her questions.
Then are you of the opinion that buy and sell in this marketplace, and obviously one of the premier firms in Wall Street, is it your opinion that speculation has no effect on the price of oil that we've seen in the run up and the reduction?
Look, I will take, it's not a simple yes-no answer. The speculators are in every market in the world. We need speculators to be in the market. So in any given moment of time, can a speculator have an influence on the market? Absolutely. And anyone who would say that would be naive. So markets are meeting places for buyers and sellers. Buyers need to enter the market, drive the market price to a place where it attracts sellers. And that is the natural balancing act that goes on day in and day out. Why you need the speculator in the market and why the commodity index was created many years ago is our industry 20 years ago was a very difficult industry. We had only clients that wanted to sell future production forward. So we had many clients that wanted to go drill oil wells, but they needed some predictability of the price of oil they were going to receive out of the well to go borrow money. They tried to enter the market and sell the oil. There was no natural long in the market. The consumers are so fragmented that they don't amalgamate to a big enough position. So we actually, as a firm, came up with the idea in the early 90s to create a long-only static investor in the commodity markets. And we created the commodity index where we could allow people that were willing to commit large pools of capital into the market for a very long period of time to facilitate the actual producers and allow them to be able to hedge their production forward to increase their production. So without speculators in the market doesn't exist. The speculator is sort of the rubber band or the spring in the middle that allows buyers and sellers to transact. It just doesn't work that well that a buyer wakes up in the morning and says, I want to buy at this price, and a seller wakes up simultaneously and says, I want to sell at that price. If the world worked like that, it would be a great world. But there's not a market in the world that works like that, so you need people to absorb all those price movements, and those people are the speculators.
So you don't want us to do anything against speculators. Okay, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
I'm fully, by the way, I am in total agreement with what Mr. Thielen has said on transparency and creating more disclosure.
Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Cohn, I just want to talk about how it looks from our vantage point here. And it's not just about CFTC. It's about a government that's been broken in terms of watching some of these financial transactions, whether it's on Wall Street, where there's been admissions on all sides where these things have broken down, whether it's Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, whether it is toxic toys coming in, that a lot of these agencies are shadows of their former selves. And when you see things happen like that Enron loophole, in the middle of the overnight it just gets changed and changes the way that these markets can be regulated. I understand that you're going to have speculators and people in these markets, but you have to understand from our vantage point that the people that are the victims of this, you can survive it if your things go up and down. These are people who can't, in Minnesota, who are filling up their trucks half with gas and they can't go up to their cabins in the summer. And so the problem with this is that the people who have most been affected by it have the least disposable income. And so what we're trying to do, and I would agree with Senator Nelson that we need to give them more tools. We don't want to mess up the market. We're happy to listen to you, but we need to give them more tools. And I guess just to make this real and why I'm supporting the Gang of 20 thing when it doesn't have speculation, I'm going to try to get it on there. If we can't, we can. The reason I'm supporting it is that we have to move as a country forward. And I understand I can't get everything that I want in this. But I just want to ask, to make this real, Mr. Kranicki, did you say that if you believe that if we don't keep these investment strategies in place, how many jobs will we lose from your own company alone?
Well, if the PTC goes away, history has shown us when that happens, the industry declines 90%. And, will that happen again? We think directionally it'll decline. And American Wind Energy Association estimates about 76,000 jobs would go away.
Thank you. And then, Mr. Wagner, if we keep going the way we are in the auto industry and we don't think ahead to these green jobs and new economy, what do you think will happen?
Well, you would have to tell me what's going to happen to the price of oil, right? Because basically that's what is driving the the demand for our products, and frankly extends across the entire economy. So when oil prices are low, everything goes great, and when they go high, then we get into situations like we are today. From a business perspective, we'd much prefer to have a diversity of sources, and we think that would provide a longer-term stability and conditions for the U.S. economy to continue to grow, which I think is at the root cause of addressing some of the issues of your concern.
Thank you. And then Mr. Steenland, our hometown airline, if we just keep going the way we're going and we don't do more with our own domestic supply and we don't do more with wind and solar and all these things that can feed into new energies, and what do you think will happen to the airline industry and all the employees we have in Minnesota?
Well, I certainly think if you dial back to the middle of July and you looked at the world where oil was at $147 a barrel, I think the U.S. airline industry and the economy as a whole would be looking radically different, in that airfares would be materially higher, service would be materially reduced, and all that means for hubs that for which corporate headquarters have expanded, service to small communities and the like would be clearly would have been adversely affected, and hopefully we can stabilize with the type of legislation that's being proposed. A lot of the experts, for take it what it's worth, say that the sort of the long-term natural supply and demand price of oil ought to be in the $70 to $90 a barrel range. If that's true, I think we can manage through this in a relatively decent way. But if we see the return of oil with that's in the 140 range, I think the world is going to look much different.
Well, very good. Well, I have to go be on a Moorhead radio station, so I'll tell them all that you're supportive of us moving ahead. And I am serious about that we need support from the corporate community as we try to move these things going forward in Congress. And we need, if you're truly supportive of these things, what I've seen so many times when we try to move climate change legislation, Mr. Rowe, or other things, is people kind of stay there for it, and then people are making calls against it. And we just can't afford to have that happen. We're going to need your help. Thank you.
Senator Domenici, go right ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to say again to all of you how much we are indebted to you for taking time off to come and talk with us. I believe, Mr. Cohen, your explanation from the marketplace standpoint of the supply and demand and how it has an impact on the price of oil, whether we like it or not, whether we like the result or not, is very necessary. You see an environment here where we can't help it. We are very much affected by emotions, and most of the time it's the emotions of our constituents. And frequently the emotion button is pushed by the wrong set of facts or the wrong interpretation, and we have a difficult job, as you can tell, trying to put together an energy bill. In fact, the chairman and I, who put 3 of them together in the past 7 years, one being the very large package that most of you are aware of, and two others. Among the other two, we finally passed CAFE changes. I say to you, Mr. Wagner, I'm not sure that you smiled as I said that, but a few years ago you would not have. But Congress finally came around and said it's obvious we've got to have smaller cars, lighter cars, and we've got to take the chance of increased injuries that might occur if that's one of the facts. But we did that, and we also did whatever's necessary to bring nuclear power on, and it's coming pretty strong. And now we have an issue that is boiled right up to the top, and it has to do with a very collateral issue to what you've been speaking of as witnesses today, and that's if we have additional reserves that are American, should we open them up for development? That's what brought us to where we are. We started that moving along, and from that came a well of support from the American people to drill for what it was ours. And that now we have an argument going, how much of that which is ours should we open up? And it's strange that we would go from not wanting to do any to those of us who started this debate wanting to open all of it and let that be decided in the future as we need it. I was very pleased to hear the oil companies that are out there using these platforms that you all know about, even though you're not in the business. The giant platforms that the oil developers put out in the water have turned out to be, technologically speaking, very, very exciting products. There's no leakage, there's no spillage. When they get down, they can have 10 or 12 wells off of one footprint. They can have directional drilling, and it's just a rather incredible feat of ingenuity with reference to offshore drilling. You heard, if you were here this morning, you would have heard the witness the company does most of that, tell us that there are 30, and all 30 are busy, and they plan to double or triple that amount, especially since they think they are going to have the American offshore market be put up for acquisition so they can plan on using what they build, what they add to this fleet of 30. That's rather exciting. It ought to be exciting to you as businessmen to think that finally the American oil industry is going to be turned loose. We have a lot of complaints about the oil industry, but when it all comes down to the bottom line, we're the only country that has any oil companies of real significance left in the world. And I guess you know that. All the oil businesses are owned by states. They're government owned, with just our American Big Five. They're the only companies that are privately owned. And I think in the final analysis, we probably have to be proud of them, whether we want to be or not. We're lucky we got them. Some people think they make too much money, but when it comes to developing our resources, they're pretty darn good. And when it comes to developing resources around the world, they're very good. And I think they're pleased if we open up more of our own property so they can do it here, rather than run around the world fighting with the kind of dictators and other personages that they've been confronted with as you've watched them over the years. So if we open up the Outer Continental Shelf and it gets let out for bid, in time we will have perhaps as many as 80 or 90 offshore rigs of significance, and they will be producing oil for us for a long time. And the previous witnesses have told us, yes, indeed, we will be using oil for a long time, even as we move through all these new things we're going to do. We just, it's not that we want to, it's just that we have to. We can't avoid using it for quite some time. I used to say 1 generation. I'm wrong. They're saying it's much more than 1 generation. It's perhaps as many as 30 or 40 years that we will continue to use it. And the issue that brought this to boil was, should it be ours or should it be somebody else's as we continue to have to use oil? And that's the issue. It should be ours if it can be, rather than somebody else's. And the only place we know that it's ours is the offshore of the United States. That's where it is in abundance. My last observation is we speak much of producing green jobs, and it's been, General Electric has told us precisely what it means. And I would say we have to be careful, and we didn't have time to inquire, but we want to make sure that a lot of that work is done here. And I do know that some of it is not, that we are importing a lot of it from Germany. I hope if we make permanent or give 5 years or 10 years to this credit so that it's got its strength, it's pinned down, I hope more of the business will come to our country and be done here. And I would ask at my last parting shot if General Electric would tell me their observation about that, because it's very important. Will these jobs come here in more abundance than now, in your opinion?
Absolutely. You see many non-U.S. manufacturers investing significant amounts of money in the United States today. One of the dynamics of the wind business is transportation costs are astronomical. So transporting large parts like wind blades and towers, that work has to be done close to the market, so it will bring jobs to where the market is.
So that'll help us.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to be with you. Thank you all.
Well, thank you all again. This has been excellent testimony, and we appreciate you taking your valuable time to talk to us today. Thank you. That'll conclude our hearing.